Whenever we turn to God, one of the things we're doing is deciding that we should be different than we are currently. We're accepting a sort of evolution, a move from a base life of shallow desires to a life of higher spiritual calling and virtue. And that process always requires lots of big changes in us. Some of the greatest changing I've ever seen has come from people who decided that they needed to make extreme changes in their sexuality, including some homosexually oriented folks who wanted to change their orientation for principled reasons. The first time I saw this happen involved a close friend of mine. This was back in my early 20s, and he was a believer who was locked in this promiscuous homosexual lifestyle that he did not like. He didn't choose to be that way, he just found himself locked in it. So he prayed about it, he joined this support group with people who sought change in their lives from all sorts of different sexual struggles. He shared with his friends, and he just took one courageous step after another. He called out to God, he had some very powerful encounters with the presence of the Holy Spirit, and it worked stunningly well for him. And today he happens to live contentedly with his beautiful wife and a family. Now, of course, that's a controversial story. There are studies today that suggest that up to 30% of people who enter programs, even non-spiritual programs, seeking change in their sexual orientation, get the change that they want. But there's a whole bunch of other people who think that it's downright mean to even suggest that homosexuals can change. I don't know everything, but it seems to me that big change is just what spiritual people do. And if you want to change your sexual life, if you want to set aside your strong desires in order to embrace higher spiritual principles that you think will elevate your life, then how could you criticize that? There are tons of guys who are trying to set aside their sexual programming in order to live monogamous or celibate lives. So sexual change is fair game, I think. But I also think that homosexuals who seek change often walk a more extreme and therefore more courageous and ultimately more inspirational road. But why would anyone want to change his or her sexuality? There's probably lots of ways to talk about that, but to my mind, the main thing for us to understand is that sex it's spiritual. There's more to it than body parts coming together. It's meant to be used in a sacred fashion, meaning if we use it in a way that's focused by God's design, in a way that's restricted by loving principle, then we get spiritual dividends. And by contrast, if we insist on treating sex as a non-sacred thing, then we force God out of it, and that cheapens the act. To misuse sex, heterosexually or homosexually, means to shatter our own sexual identity. It means that we'll come to think of ourselves as less than we truly should be. We'll come to think that we're just our programming and that we can't change. We'll forget that we have spiritual capacity. So yeah, technically, I think biblical believers have to say that homosexual sex is sinful. But who wants to talk about sin? Jesus actually goes out of his way in the Gospels to avoid mentioning sin. And of course, he makes it ridiculously easy to get forgiven. You could actually say that as God sees it, sin really isn't the issue. The issue is the damage that sin causes us. Sin hurts us, it clouds our minds. And sexual sin makes us think that we cannot live according to our spiritual calling. But the truth, for those who are courageous enough to accept it, is that we're all potentially supernatural people, able to set aside our fleshly nature in order to evolve into something that's better, that's more powerful, that's more loving and selfless, more godly. And this is part of what Jesus meant when he said, "The truth shall set you free." And my hat is off to anyone who's willing to take their basic sexual desires, put them on the block, and say, I'll even set these aside for the sake of truth and freedom.